coming up to almost 3 years since the beginning of the COVID-19 global pandemic. So my first question is just to understand, what do we think that, or the impact 3 years on, that the pandemic has had on the world of work and then also on the HR profession? So Kevin, would you like to go first?
So there's so much to that, Leon. But
Yeah.
look, just briefly, I guess, 2019. It does certainly seem like another age, doesn't it? And I think the COVID experience has definitely acted, as I'd call it, sort of a circuit breaker, to the world of work. That was already changing rapidly before 2020, right? I think some of the fault lines actually that were there in work models and in working life in general were exposed, or have been exposed, and I think people recognize that, over 1,000 days of change to working life. But it just felt that before then we were still trying to run faster to keep up with the 21st century realities of work, before COVID came, rather than dealing with the underlying issues that were present then. Like, for an example, I think flexibility. So I was on this Employee of the Future task force in 2018. Flexibility and skills were the two big issues that came through the filter process as to what were we going to do about these two big mega trends, if you like, from an employee perspective. It was a huge issue pre 2020: childcare, elder care, commuting, costs of living, and so on. But it was only some organizations, though, were really taking that seriously, if you know what I mean. We were still trying to run faster, still trying to employ this 20th century, kind of model of work. And individuals themselves, I think, also really taken a critical look, since then at their work life and what they want and need, But I think for HR, to answer that side of your question, I'd be very glass half full about the profession now, where it's at and what it's achieved, and its future role. It's an incredible journey it's been on over the last 50 years, and I chart that in the book Thrive, about what an incredible journey it's been on since the Industrial Revolution, really. When I started out, it was probably pay and pensions, was the kind of main concern of HR. But you just look now at the range of activity, and what we contribute. And so it's so exciting but I think in that challenge, in that sort of opportunity, there's also a challenge, isn't there? We've got this growing mandate, and it's now about how do we sustain that, and how do we meet the expectations, that are there from all stakeholders. But I think fundamentally it's acted as a checkpoint, a circuit breaker for all of us, really, to deal with some of those fundamental issues of where work was going anyway, if you like, pre-COVID.
Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I think in the pandemic, HR really kind of stepped up, and I think that really raised the credibility of both, the HR as a professionalism, and also those practitioners within it. And one of the trends that I've really noticed in the last few years has been that I think pre-pandemic, HR was kind of seen as a generalism. Everybody was kind of a generalist, and if there was a budget for HR, there was one person or a team of people that were generalists. And now I think, because of that exposure with the pandemic, and because people have stepped up and there's more that we've been relied on for more strategic thinking and supporting the businesses and being able to respond to change at pace, I think the specialisms that were probably always there, although there's a few more now, have really come into people teams. We talk about T-shaped teams and things like that. I think that's more common than it was. But I think that's because, of how people are viewing the value that HR or people teams add to businesses.
Great.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what I would add to that is that we need to be more holistic in the approach that we're taking. And it's also that we're seeing this intimate interlinking of business problems and sort of people strategy or people problems. And a lot of challenges that business are facing relate to the people side of business. And actually to find the skills to innovate your product, to scale teams up and down, to be as flexible as you need to be in today's market, you have to do that through your people. And yes, you can do that through some tech, and you can definitely do it through some methods of working, but the people component is so important. And I think the pandemic brought that out probably more than anything, but also it slightly changed the game. So we had this renegotiation of the employer-employee contract, and there's now, there's more demand for a more human element, and actually there's a bit of kind of strength to the employee position because skills are hard to find, and how do you keep the great people? You've got to have a great place to work. So I think it's that. We used to go on about having a seat at the table and all these kind of things. And I used to say, well, you can't have a seat at the table unless you have some data and you have some credibility about how you make decisions. But by default now, good people consulting feeds into business strategy. And I think that's a good thing, but we have to evolve to be able to, I think, play a part.
Yeah.